Every time.
Hey, we're back.
We are back.
How many
We are
how
back.
many seconds until my camera or my microphone dies in this one? How long do we think we've got?
We're not playing that game this week. This has been such an exciting week with everything going on, and
It's been a good week.
everybody's back from RSA.
Everyone's back from RSA.
They are.
RSA was, I'm assuming, huge and a ton of fun for everybody.
I'm pretty sure. I don't go. It's a bit of a flight for me,
Yeah.
coast to coast, and it's just not my cup of tea. I'll stick to DEF CON.
It was what was it that I used to talk about with my friends about it? It was like everyone used to be really excited to go to E3 for like gaming news. They're like, E3 is such a cool convention, and then like eventually E3 just became this like kind of like corporate, like it's really just a kind of advertising. And like RSA used to be really cool, and it's now started to like shift that way. That like Black Hat came in as the cool new one, and now even people are like, I don't really go to Black Hat, I go to DEF CON.
Yeah,
like we go to the cool one.
Yeah, I'll stick with the technical stuff.
Yeah.
But Tristan, how are you doing this week? How are things?
Things are going pretty good. Things are going pretty great. Let's see. I mean, stuff that's happened in my world related to work and stuff. We got out this week a really cool, actually last week during RSA. We published it just at the end of RSA, but we got a really cool project that I worked on out. So that we do, and our viewers know that we do the GRIT reports. So the GuidePoint Research and Intelligence Team reports on ransomware activity. So we published our annual report a couple months ago, summing up all of 2022 and the activity that happened. But then we made something. I'm really glad that I was able to sneak it through, that it got approved and we got it out there, because it's so I love it. We made a high school yearbook of all of the threat actors. So like giving them like high school yearbook style accolades, like most likely to become a CEO and stuff like that. And I had a ton of fun writing these like very snarky 16 or 17-year-old high schooler perspective like write-ups of these threat actors and their activity. It's a ton of fun. You can find it on the website right now. It's just the GRIT yearbook. Yeah, it's super fun, and that just came out. So
perfect.
I'm happy about that.
Nice. All right. Well, we've got a lot of stories to cover for today, and so I think let's really quickly jump into something important. The views and opinions expressed by the host of this live stream are their own, us, and do not necessarily reflect the official opinions of GuidePoint Security, the company.
You beat it. You managed to get it all in there.
I know I did. This is the week of May 5th, 2023, for GPS Live. All right. I know. I found some really good stories this week.
Yeah, you found some really good stories this week.
And so, how about this? I'll kick off the first one, and we'll kind of run from there. But this story coming to us from actually Mac Rumors of all places, is about the atomic macOS stealer malware, which, I just want to make it very clear, Macs do get viruses. Thank you. All right, conversation's over. We're done here. I'll walk.
John Hodgman, pretending to be a Mac, told me otherwise.
I know. But yeah, Macs are still prime targets out there, and so this isn't anything new. But in good standard health of what we're seeing, from the criminal industry, this is definitely one of those malware subscription models that everybody seems to be moving towards, right?
Yeah. It's interesting mentioning, that the the old kind of wives' tale, right, of Macs don't get viruses. This beautiful rumor that they themselves perpetrated with a extensive advertising campaign in the mid 2000s. But back then it was fairly true. But I think what's really interesting is to look at the still relative, I mean, in the grand scale of things, kind of rarity of like a true like Mac specific virus
like
or
vulnerability.
Because I find it interesting because of the the proliferation of Macs as the computer of choice for tech startups and for tech companies.
Okay.
Right? Like we have this kind of like recent in the grand scheme of things shift towards like tech companies being like, oh, we want to be giving people computers that they want to use, and giving a lot of people in their companies Macs. So it's really interesting to me that like these companies that have tons and tons of money through venture capital, and tons of interest in protecting secret information for their companies, right, are giving out Macs, and that it hasn't led to like a boom of Mac vulnerabilities being discovered and Mac malware being created.
Well, I mean, they definitely have like a good significant market share based from like a
Yeah,
manufacturer perspective. I think PC is winning as a whole, but that's kind of like the whole iPhone versus Android. There's just a lot of models and makers.
yeah,
But talking about this atomic Mac OS stealer, right? As you mentioned, Amos, it's advertised around Telegram, right? It seems like the hackers' favorite chat platform these days,
yeah,
and it's targeting macOS through like a DMG, an install file. Once on the system, then it will essentially create like a what's like a fake password collection box, oftentimes seen in like your settings menu to kind of get
yeah.
certain privileges. And once it actually has your system password, it will go in and pull like keychain stuff, and it will pull all kinds of things. In fact, part of the advertising campaign from Telegram goes in to talk about keychain sysinfo, files from the system, and your OS password, along with targeting all your browsers, including Vivaldi, that little one that nobody's ever heard of.
And
Um,
Yandex and Opera and
and
Opera GX. Like
yeah,
they
hey,
really
I
cover the
mean,
gamut.
doesn't I think Opera has the VPN built in these days. I think some people are starting to use it. It
Yeah,
targets crypto wallets because crypto is still a thing.
yeah,
And it features for that $1,000 a month premium a web control panel so that you can look at all of your victims.
yeah.
Right? DMG file. There's totally a lesson learned here, right? It's kind of staring you straight in the face. What do you think?
Don't click on files that you don't know the provenance of. Um, yeah, I think it is interesting. I mentioned this before we started, but I do think it's interesting that like oftentimes the Mac attacks that you hear about still do rely on something as basic as like, hey, opening an actual installer file and giving it permissions, as opposed to a like, oh, it just found its way onto your computer because a computer somewhere else was attacked, which is often what you see with large scale attacks. Something like WannaCry makes use of a vulnerability that is present across almost every Windows machine and is able to just spread rapidly because it's able to find a way from one to another. With Mac vulnerabilities and Mac attacks, you often just see it as still reliant like on the end user actively doing something
Yeah.
to
If you
go
click,
in there.
nah, yeah, and right, the big suggestion to all our viewers and everybody is don't just install stuff from the internet, especially if it's untrusted, if you don't know where it came from an unverified source. We saw this in
Yeah,
lots of stories from back in the day, like the putty stuff, and various tools. Apple themselves is recommending the App Store if you need things, because at least it's it's not guaranteed, but it's somewhat vetted, better than
yeah,
a rando source from the internet.
yeah. It's actually there's a story later on. I think that I'll be able to tie back to this just a little bit.
Nice.
But the other thing is to I think this article from Mac Rumors does have that like very basically, yeah, don't open and install things that you aren't sure about. Always avoid opening links in emails, use caution, and blah blah blah. But I think there's a deeper also security lesson to take from this, which is also just like this thing, you double click on it and it has a pop-up that asks for your password. And even when you are installing, I don't know why I said installing that way, but even when you're installing stuff that is from a verified source and that you are sure about, like you will get password pop-ups. What's still important is just knowing where, like, why is it asking for that access, and what is it going to do with, like, why does it actually need that? What is it going to do with it? Where is it sending any information that you give to it? And obviously, you know, this harkens back to to software days of companies doing horrible things with your information, and then be like, well, we put it in the EULA and you agreed to it. And it's like, well, no one has time to read the entire EULA, right? No one is going to take every piece of software that they install and go verify every little bit of information. But anytime that a piece of software asks for your password for your system, like, you should at least have a relatively good idea of why it needs that and what it's trying to do. And
You'd
I
hope,
think it's,
right?
I think it is a little bit of a disservice that this article doesn't actually also call that out. Like, yeah, even when you are sure of where the thing is coming from, you should be sure of where it's going.
It's always going to be a challenge, right? It's going to be cat and mouse and wicked deception. But with that in mind, uh, there's definitely something else going on in our community. I'll let you kind of roll with this one. I haven't really thought of a jump to the next.
Hold on. I'm sorry. Someone was at my door. This never happens, but someone is ringing my doorbell.
Well, while Tristan is handling something of the sort, I'll go ahead and mute him in the meantime. Let's jump into the next story here, which is a bit of a different take. This one's coming to us from Bleeping Computer, and it's focused around the ninth largest city in the United States based on population. That's Dallas, Texas. They've been suffering a ransomware attack by a group called Royal. Now, for those familiar that keep up on your ransomware gangs, Royal is loosely connected with the Conti group, which many may have heard of back in the day. Oh, well, welcome back to the fun.
Yeah, this is a perfect time for me to come in. The Royal ransomware group, actually, I checked with our Grit team, with Grit. The T
Perfect.
stands for team. So I checked with Grit, the Guide Point Research and Intelligence team, to check with them on how they currently classify Royal, because Royal ransomware group, as you were just mentioning, is associated with Conti. Conti last year was a ransomware group that disappeared after a massive leak.
Yeah, shut down,
their,
disappeared, self-dismantled.
yeah. They suffered a large leak of a lot of their internal files, their encryptor, things like that, and they just kind of vanished from the scene. It was also very close to, I believe, when Russia first started military activity in Ukraine. So there was some suspicion about that as well. But then Royal popped up on the scene a little bit later, and so according to the Grit ransomware taxonomy, which is their classification system for where a group is in their maturity level and what we actually expect to see from them. They classify Royal not as a offshoot or anything like that, but just at this point as a full rebrand, bordering on full-time, which is full-time groups being groups like Lockbit, who are really well established and they are here to stay. Grit classifies Royal right now as a rebrand of Conti, not as a splinter cell or an offshoot.
Got it. And we do have a fun comment though, because of Tim, he would like his Royale with cheese. But that is to all of you across the pond and how you order at McDonald's. So to kind of go with this, what's critical compared to some of the more municipal stories that we've covered in the past is basically the entire IT system has been brought offline.
Yeah.
To one, prevent the spread, but two, also because a lot of it is affected by the spread. This sadly does include 911 dispatching. We've seen stories from California where luckily their 911 call centers were not affected. In this case, it has spread so far and wide with the also the decision to shut down certain components to keep systems from being affected, that they're really struggling with this one.
Yeah, and it's interesting from a tactics perspective, and from a group dynamics perspective. a lot of larger groups that are out there will basically have like an ethical code almost saying like they won't
Mhm.
attack hospitals, they won't attack like things that could actually lead to loss of life. So it is interesting, in this case, it's hard to tell from the wording of the article on Bleeping Computer if the 911 systems itself themselves were attacked or by Royal, or if it was simply like as collateral to the IT department saying we're going to shut down these operations, that the 911 system was just taken off or taken offline. The dispatch system, we should say. 911 is still functioning. It's their dispatch system.
Mhm.
But it's interesting from a tactical perspective to look at that and say, okay, does this indicate a shift in what Royal is willing to go after in order to achieve their end goals and get their payment, right? Because if you take a 911 system offline, you are very tangibly impacting lives.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. And something also that kind of stood out to me about this particular ransomware attack, besides what you would almost normally see from these kinds of criminals, is their use of how they're indicating, right? And so, what I mean by that is a number of network printers within the city's network began printing out the ransom notes this morning, whereas conventionally, many users are used to seeing a notepad file on their desktop, for instance, of hey, your files have been ransomed, or each file individually has been replaced with some kind of ransom note. But to identify and take advantage of printers and using some kind of standard printer protocol without drivers to simply push stuff out, I found very interesting and different. It's very possible there's a lot of other groups that do this, but it's definitely something new that stood out to me for this. Now, we'll
I
yeah, very weird.
well, something interesting if you actually read the ransom note that was printed off, um, is something that we talked about in the most recent ransomware report, the annual ransomware report for 2022.
Mhm.
Grit did a extensive write up of the use of layered extortion tactics,
Okay.
and increasingly coercive extortion tactics within ransomware. So the original idea of ransomware, hey, we've encrypted your files, you have to pay to get them back.
Yeah.
Eventually evolved into double extortion, right? Saying, hey, we have encrypted your files and we've stolen files.
Mhm.
And so if you want to make sure that those are deleted, you have to pay us. And now we're seeing more coercive tactics layered on top of that, like the use of DDoS, right? If a company is ignoring your ransom demands or refusing to negotiate with you, hit them with a DDoS, take the rest of their systems offline, right? Or the use of selective leaks. So taking the most important information that you have and just saying, well, we've already leaked it and we'll leak more if you don't pay us. But in this specific note, it's tough because it's a little cut off at the edges. Um,
Mhm.
but there's the last paragraph there. It says, fortunately, we've got you covered. Royal offers you a unique deal for a modest royalty. And it even says, got it in the thing. Um, uh, for our something covering you from reputational, legal, financial, regulatory, and insurance risk. To put it simply, your files will be decrypted, your data restored and kept confidential. But the wording of it specifically almost makes it feel like they're running like a mafia style racket to be
Yeah,
like, continue
they're
paying
going
us and
after
we
the
won't pay you
brand.
again. Yeah. It almost seems like they're asking for protection money more than more than just payment to decrypt. Um,
Yeah.
because it even says they end the note with try Royal today and enter the new era of data security. Like this reads like a cold call email, not a ransom note.
Yeah, and one of the other things too that is also a little bit different about how this is going is that they're using these callback phishing attacks, right? Which
Yeah,
is essentially, getting people through social engineering to convince them to install some kind of remote software, right? We've seen this and numerous different things, right? Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google support, right? This
yeah,
is fake company. We need to access your computer. You have a virus. We need to investigate, download the software, right? And so they're using a similar tactic to get onto the systems for these victims rather than the conventional kind of email attachments that we've seen historically from other organizations.
Yeah, it is interesting in this day and age, in this era, that callback phishing still is effective, right? The fact
Mhm.
that anyone can convince any person still to install remote access software on their computer just over the phone is mind-boggling to me. But of course, obviously, it's happening, and that actually reaches back to the atomic macOS um, stuff that we were saying, like, hey, that relies on someone installing a DMG. This would be
Mhm.
probably one of the more likely avenues to get them
Yeah.
to actually double click a DMG and install something and give it password access.
Some
But yeah,
some
their use of
sensitive
callback
events.
phishing is interesting.
Definitely. Well, with that in mind, though, let's go from sadly being a victim to some of these criminals to how to not be a victim with our next story. You want to kick us off here?
Yeah, let me pull the banners up. There we go. So Gmail has added a blue verified checkmark
Blue
along
check
with every
gang.
social media
Woo!
site. Right, we are now entering the good news era of the
I
show, the good
don't
news.
count Twitter because you can buy Twitter check marks these days.
Yeah,
So we're
Twitter does not count.
no,
Um,
but others do
yeah, but
for
others do.
genuine verification.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about verification recently. There was like Tinder adding new options for
Yep.
video verification to make sure that you are who you say you are. Um, I think that there has been a shift in this in kind of corporate mindsets around like users to say like, oh, hey, actually fake users pose a huge problem to us as a liability. And so Gmail has now added a blue verified checkmark to corporate emails. So a company can now verify that they own, the entire set of email addresses that they would email you from. Their info, their no reply, their all, like anything that falls under their domains. They can get a verified check on it so that when you receive an email from the example you gave earlier, Jonathan, Best Buy, you can
Hmm.
know, oh, this one's actually from Best Buy. And it has the Best Buy logo in it because it's from Best Buy, not because someone built an email to look like it's from Best Buy.
Yeah, that was exactly the case we were talking about before the show, because even in my own personal Gmail account, I'm starting to see these blue check marks. And you have to open the body of the email to see it in the top header portion. It's not like
Mhm.
in the inline section yet. But it's fantastic to see it part of what Google's calling their brand indicators for message identification feature. And companies, big or small, can start taking advantage of this kind of thing. Part of the BIMI or BIMI program, by simply using stuff like DMARC to essentially sign and validate the ownership of the sending parties and the domains. And so, if you're not actively kind of looking into this stuff for your organization, availability for Google Workspace customers, also known as G Suite, is kicking out, and this is also already rolled out to all personal Gmail accounts. So be on the lookout for these blue check marks in your Gmail to help kind of stop some of that nasty phishing that's happening.
Yeah. This is a great move. I love this. I'm just waiting for when personal verification comes to Gmail, so so that I can see that, hey, this is a verified account that's been around for a while and is emailing you, not something that was spun up 2 hours ago.
In
Um,
time, man, money can buy anything still. Like
money can
business
buy
email
anything.
compromise can still fall through the cracks with this one.
Yeah. So that leads us though, like, speaking of Google and improvements in security, that leads us, I think, to one of our last stories here, which is one that I have strong thoughts about, coming from TechCrunch. um, Apple and Google are teaming up to increase security around Bluetooth tracking devices like Apple's AirTag. There's been some rumor about Samsung or Google working on their own version of AirTag, and building a similar network to the Find My network that Apple employs. So it's good to see this coming out ahead of that. But the two companies have announced that they are joining forces to write a standard for essentially notifying you if you are being followed by a Bluetooth tracking device. And then other companies, they're publishing it and opening it for comment for, I think, 3 months, from other interested parties like Tile, Samsung, Eufy, Pebblebee, like these other tracking device manufacturers. Now, the interesting thing about this one is that Apple's AirTags are really the only one within all of those different companies that pose like really present danger, because the proliferation of the Find My network, man, I'm really on proliferation today, of the Find My network being that any Apple device can ping off of those things to say like, oh, I found this device over here. That's what really makes AirTags dangerous, is that I can be well out of Bluetooth range of your device, or of the device that I stick on you, and still get tracking updates about where you are. So it's, whereas with Tile, they have a similar network, but it's only for people who are using Tile and have the app installed on their phone, and allow it that Bluetooth access. But it is good to see them doing this, especially looking at it from a corporate perspective. When it comes to things like penetration testing, or trying to gain physical access to an environment, right? If I can slip an AirTag into someone's briefcase and then watch where they go every day, and start to see like, they always leave the office at this time without ever having to be close to the building, right? And start to build that pattern up so that I can try and find something in there to exploit. It's good that they are alerting people now to those things.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, right? Apple isn't necessarily revolutionist, but yeah, a billion iPhones out in the wild does lend it to be one of the biggest kind of like, Bluetooth beacon tracker networks. And right, the skepticism, you and I were talking a little bit before the show, and I'll kind of spoil it, was around the fact that this isn't necessarily a new thing. And also, like, you build all these infrastructure, of course something bad is going to be, somebody bad's going to use something good, right? And so, like, different parties are coming out and saying that they've built a lot of these features, right, to help be helpful, and to help people with lost things. I know we see it all the time with people now shoving AirTags in their check bags, because historically those things tend to disappear. They are sticking AirTags in their children's backpacks to monitor their
the city of New
location.
York encouraging people to use AirTags in their cars to track them in case they get stolen.
Yeah, there's a number of things, but of course, just like everything else, obviously, of course, you try to do some proactive features to discourage unwanted tracking, as they say.
Right.
But right, and again, branded stuff, there's always room for improvement. But I like the fact that they're going to the IETF, right, the Internet Engineering Task Force, and they're saying, we want to draft this standard. We need everybody who's in this game involved. And then they're even bringing in some outside advocacy groups, such as like the National Network to End Domestic Violence and the Center for Democracy and Technology, which are showing, which have highlighted some of the abuses of the technology, and saying, we want you part of this messaging to make sure that we're helping everybody.
I think it's these are the kinds of things that I would hope in the future we see taken into account before a product is released. Right, like I think it was as soon as AirTags were announced, there were a lot of people who immediately were like, well, that's a problem, because an Android user would never be able to know if an AirTag was planted on them, and it took a while before that was addressed. So it is good to see these companies that are historically rivals, quote unquote, right, like coming together to solve these problems. If anyone from Apple or Google is watching, can you please do that for RCS now, so that my text messages aren't broken anytime that someone from Apple texts me? But
good try.
But we've got one final story that we'll hit really quick, just because we found it really late, but it is exciting.
It's cool.
Announcement. Cyberscoop.com has this one. At DEF CON 30, different AI companies, including Microsoft and Google and Stability and OpenAI, have announced that they are going to make their large language model systems open, or they're going to have an open version of them a version of them open for attacking at DEF CON. They are inviting DEF CON attendees to red team their systems.
Yeah,
and I love that.
Absolutely. No, so for those that do attend DEF CON, I will see you out there in Las Vegas later this year. So please be sure to check out at the AI Village, where all of these different groups are coming together to say, hey, look, find vulnerabilities in our platform. We've seen this in the car hacking village, right, with different vehicles. We've seen this in the voting village, where they hack into voting machines. It was just a matter of time with the AI Village growth recently. I'm a big DEF CON person, so I'll see you out there. Hence the flag.
I'm hoping maybe I'll be able to make it. So.
Oh, you will have a great time. I guarantee it. So get to hacking all of the mainstream AI platforms today, because it will only make the internet a safer place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for the week of May 5th, 2023. We really appreciate you giving us some of your time here, especially if you're watching on demand. That means the world to us. If you have any comments, if you have any thoughts on things as you're watching this, go ahead and drop those in the comments below, and we'll see those. And if we want to continue a conversation next week, we will. But until then, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I'm Jonathan Singer.
And we will catch you next time. All right. Thanks, everybody.